Reading and spelling, opposite sides of the same coin. For years, educators have treated reading and spelling as two skills that build on one another. The assumption has been that if a child can read well, spelling will naturally follow. But that assumption is not true. While both reading and spelling rely on phonics, they use it in different ways. Phonics actually works in two opposite directions, one for reading and one for spelling. Reading and writing are opposite processes, and each depends on organizing phonics differently in the human brain to use it. Mastering one does not automatically strengthen the other, because decoding for reading and encoding for spelling are opposite skills that require practice and instruction separately. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode on KZ Academy. I'm Misty, a credentialed teacher with over 20 years of experience in second language acquisition, mathematics, and elementary education. Through teaching, coaching, and tutoring, I've dedicated my career to helping students, parents, and educators understand the science behind how we learn. This episode is inspired by posts I have been making since 2018 in online forums, which helped lay the groundwork for what is now known as the science of reading. Many of the key ideas that Emily Hanford later shared as her research were already being discussed and shared by me in these forums before she brought them to a wider audience. It's gratifying to see that the techniques I've been refining for over 20 years are now being embraced across America. Her voice played a crucial role in raising awareness and bringing these ideas into the mainstream. Today's episode is about phonics for reading and phonics for spelling, and why they are opposite sides of the same coin. Reading and spelling might seem like closely related skills, but they actually rely on very different processes. Decoding is the skill we use for reading. It is how we look at written letters and turn them into sounds. Spelling depends on encoding, which is turning sounds into letters. Each direction uses a different set of skills. Working on one does not automatically help the other because decoding and encoding are opposite processes. They both rely on phonics information, but the brain needs to organize the letters to sounds for reading in a completely different way from when it organizes sounds to letters for spelling. Phonics for reading and phonics for spelling. For a long time, phonics was mainly associated with spelling. Even as recently as 2018, many educators believed that strengthening spelling skills would directly improve reading ability. What people didn't realize was that phonics is used in both reading and spelling, but in completely different ways. Now, human brain organizes this information differently for each of these complex skills. Decoding is a specific skill used for reading. Spelling does not use, teach, or reinforce the skill of decoding at all. In 2018, I began emphasizing the phonics for reading must be explicitly taught. As one of the early educators contributing to what is now known as the science of reading, I focus on clarifying how the skill of reading develops. Learning to read follows a progression. It starts with phonemic awareness, which is the understanding that our language is made up of individual sounds. From there, phonics for reading connects those letters to sounds, allowing the learner to decode words. When reading, the letters are already on the page. The learner looks at the letters, identifies the sounds, and blends them together to form words. Reading is about recognizing and blending letter sounds quickly and accurately. The brain stores phonics for reading as a system of printed letters to sound connections. Spelling, however, works in the opposite direction. The learner starts with the spoken word, identifies the sounds, and must recall which combination of letters represents those sounds. That means spelling moves from sounds to printed letters. Let's take the word rain, for example. When reading, the letters are already there. R, A, I, N. The reader looks at them and blends the sounds. R makes R, AI makes A, N makes N. Blending the sounds together gives the word rain. That is not too hard for most first graders because AI usually says A and the letters guide them through the process. But when spelling, the process reverses. Now the learner starts with the sounds rain. For the sound R, the letter R is fairly straightforward. Similarly, N being recognized as the letter N is also simple because this sound is usually represented by a consonant with only one sound. But A, that is where it gets tricky. The long A sound can be written in many different ways. It might be A space E, like in the words cake or name, AY, like in the words day or play, A as an open syllable, like in the word baby, EA, like in the word break, EIGH, like in the word eight, EI, like in the word vain, EY, like in the word they, or AI, like in the word rain or train. Many first graders can easily read rain because the letters are right in front of them, but spelling it correctly is much more difficult. They might try to spell it as RAN, thinking that it can be a long sound, or RANE when writing it as this VCE letter combination for making long vowels is the common way that long vowels are introduced in kindergarten. Reading and spelling rely on the same phonics code, the same graphemes, but the brain uses the code in opposite directions. In reading, the process moves from print to sound. In spelling, it moves from sound to print. Once a learner knows that AI represents the long A sound, reading a word like rain isn't too difficult because AI usually makes that sound. Spelling the same word, however, is much harder. The person has to start with the sound A and then choose the correct letter combination from the many possibilities, such as A space E, AY, EA, EI, EY, EIGH, or AI. Selecting the correct one takes far more time and practice. This difference helps explain why some people are better at reading than spelling, and others are better at spelling than reading. One skill does not automatically improve the other. A person can become a strong speller without becoming a more fluent reader, and vice versa. Reading and spelling develop separately because they are not the same skill. They are opposite processes, which require practice to fully develop. The role of graphemes. A key part of understanding reading and spelling is the concept of graphemes, the written symbols that represent sounds in a phonetic language. As a second language acquisition specialist, I have been using the term graphemes for many years. Before 2018, however, it was rarely applied to English phonics instruction. Most programs focused on the 44 phonemes in English at around the kindergarten level, without fully explaining how these sounds are represented by letters in over 150 different common combinations. Introducing graphemes to English phonics instruction gave teachers a framework to understand that English, though complex, is still a phonetic language rather than a pictographic one. Graphemes link sounds to letters and letters to sounds, forming the foundation for phonics for reading and phonics for spelling, respectively. The brain has to organize the phonics for reading differently from the phonics for spelling. Bringing the concepts of graphemes into phonics instruction fundamentally changed how teachers approach reading and spelling in English. Until I began sharing this work online in 2018, most educators were unaware of these critical distinctions and the way the brain handles reading and spelling as separate and opposite skills. Why spelling can come first. At the most basic level, spelling is actually easier to learn than reading. When first learning sounds to letters, it is easier to connect the sound to a letter rather than blending the sounds together to read a word. Spelling begins with sounds. The learner hears or says a sound and then chooses the letter that represents it. This process allows time to think through each sound to letter match. In kindergarten, that means learning the 26 letters and up to 44 phonemes that make up the English language. The amount of information is manageable, and students can apply it slowly and carefully. In this sense, spelling in kindergarten is simpler than learning to read. Reading works in the opposite direction. The letters are already on the page, and the reader has to recognize them, recall the correct sounds, and blend those sounds together to form words. This process happens much faster and places greater demand on working memory. The skill of blending is what makes reading so challenging. This skill needs to be almost instantaneous and repeated over and over again to read word after word that has to be read. As I once wrote, reading 4 words in a sentence can take seconds. Learning to read those 4 words can take days, weeks, or even months. Learning to read takes time, but once you are able to read, it does not take that much time to use the skill. Spelling, on the other hand, starts with letters and sounds in the opposite direction, allowing the learner time to think. The example of rain was chosen because that is phonics at a first grade level. At the kindergarten level, both reading and spelling rely on the same 26 letters and usually a corresponding sound or 2 for each. For reading, the brain has to organize the letters to sounds. For spelling, the brain has to organize from sounds to letters. The direction of processing is opposite, which makes them fundamentally different skills. Yet, at this early stage, because there is about a 1-to-1 correspondence of a letter to a sound being practiced, the 2 skills can be developed together. At this stage, they are both building foundational phonics skills in opposite directions. The brain's 2 jobs, recognition and recall. Foundational reading skills are usually introduced first because once a person learns to read, it is easier to recognize graphemes than to organize and produce them from memory. In reading, the information is right in front of us. The reader looks at the letters, recalls their sounds, and blends those sounds together to read a word. Spelling works in the opposite direction with a different organization. The learner starts with the sound in mind, thinks of all the possible letter combinations that could represent it, chooses the correct one, and writes it down. This process happens for every sound in a word. Both skills depend on phonics, but the brain has to organize them differently for each of the skills to be performed. Reading builds letter-to-sound connections that makes English readable. Spelling builds sound-to-letter combinations, which makes English writable. Reading moves from print to sound. Spelling moves from sound to print. In order to read from letters to sounds, the brain needs to see the letters and make the possible correct sounds for that letter. For spelling, the sound is given, and the brain needs to hear the sound and select the possible correct letters that are associated with that sound. Students are expected to read using phonics by the end of first grade. During that year, they're introduced to nearly all of the common grapheme combinations used for reading in English, with a few more complex patterns added in second grade. By third grade, they should be able to read almost any word in the English language. This has been true even before phonics-based reading instruction became common in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. This is also why the gap often appears between reading and spelling in first grade. By the end of second grade, most students can read words using all the common graphemes, but they're not yet expected to spell them accurately. Learning to read is typically completed around second grade, while accurate spelling continues developing through about fifth grade. When to move forward in each. Learning to spell is actually easier than learning to read, especially at the kindergarten level. Spelling starts with a sound, and the learner can take time to think through which letter represents that sound. This sound-to-letter connection is easier than learning to blend letters to read words. Reading, on the other hand, requires almost instant recognition of letters to sounds. The letters on the page must be quickly decoded and blended to read words. Blending is a complex skill that takes months or even more than a year to master. At the kindergarten level, both reading and spelling should be worked on at the same time. The same 26 letters and their associated sounds are being learned, so early spelling practice can strengthen phonics skills, while the child is also learning to blend to read in the opposite direction. These skills can develop in parallel because the brain can build its foundation for phonics in both directions. By first grade, Reading generally becomes easier than spelling once decoding is in place. Recognizing letters and sounds is faster than recalling which letter or letters to write for a given sound. At this stage, a student who can decode is usually more fluent at reading than spelling. Parents and educators often ask whether a child should master reading before starting spelling. The answer isn't about one before the other. It's about readiness. A child does not need to finish learning to read before beginning spelling instruction. Early writing and spelling practice can support phonics understanding, especially while the skill of blending for reading, which uses phonics in the opposite direction, is still being developed. Learning is cumulative. Each complex skill must be built on a solid foundation. Reading relies on letters to sounds, while spelling relies on sounds to letters. Both use the same phonics system, but the brain organizes and retrieves these skills differently. This is why I emphasize that reading and spelling are opposite sides of the same coin. Decoding is a skill specific to reading. Spelling does not use, teach, or reinforce decoding. Encoding is a skill specific to spelling. Each skill requires deliberate practice in its own direction. If a student struggles with words containing new letters or letter combination, it makes sense to focus on reading first. Strengthening decoding skills is vital before moving on to more complex spelling patterns, as the brain needs to organize the phonics letters to sounds and sounds to letters in two different ways. Furthermore, reading fluency is expected by the end of second grade, so ensuring that a child can quickly and accurately recognize letters to their corresponding sounds should be the priority. After reading skills are established, those same letters can then be reorganized for spelling, moving from sounds to letters. Spelling accuracy continues developing through fifth grade. Building each skill ensures that both reading and spelling are built on a strong foundation. Phonics is not just about sounds. It is about how those sounds connect to graphemes. Reading uses these connections from print to sound, while spelling uses them from sound to print. Both use phonics, but they are truly opposite sides of the same coin. Practical tips and resources. In upcoming episodes, we'll explore practical strategies for effective reading instruction. But if you're eager to get started now, check out my Learn to Read Teacher's Manual, Volumes 1 and 2, and the Student Learn to Read and Write Journal. These resources offer a clear, systematic path for teaching letter recognition, phonics, and blending. It's like having your very own step-by-step guide for reading instruction. Now, back to the conclusion. Reading and spelling both rely on phonics, but they use it in opposite directions. A strong understanding of graphemes is essential because phonics is not just about phonemes. Graphemes are the written symbols that represent sounds in a phonetic language, and how the brain organizes these symbols differs for reading and spelling. Teaching each complex skill allows students to develop the ability to read and spell. This distinction was missing in many older phonics programs, which often stop short of explaining how phonics is organized differently for reading and for spelling. Recognizing the role of graphemes helps students understand the complexity of English and how phonics supports both reading and writing. Both skills matter. Both are complex. Both are essential. Reading and spelling are truly opposite sides of the same coin. Thanks for listening. And remember, phonics isn't just about learning sounds. It's about how those sounds link to written words. When reading, we go from print to sound. When spelling, we go from sound to print. Both skills rely on the same phonics system, but in different directions, which is why reading and spelling are truly opposite sides of the same coin. If you found this discussion helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And as always, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring the fascinating world of education. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode.